So hello again, I am back here to talk about Resident Evil 8, or Resident Evil Village, or RE8, or whatever whatever you want to call it. This is kind of to go alongside my review. I was going to script this, but I thought the unscripted seems to work better. I might see trying to do more scripted stuff soon. But yeah, I just want to sort of like run through kind of my overall thoughts on it, so that if you would prefer to listen to some of my thoughts rather than read through how long my article is, you can do that. So to kind of start off, like, I really like this game. I think it's going to be sort of, as the more I talk, the more that's going to become apparent. But I'll start from like talking about different sections. We'll start off with like the story. Obviously, I've been playing this. Well, I actually got it a day early, so I beat it on the Saturday, but I'd started on the Thursday, which is quite nice. But yeah, in terms of the story, obviously this is a sequel to Resi 7. So you're once again playing as Ethan Winters, much like the in 7. And the kind of vibe and general like kind of style of the game is quite visibly different from 7. And I think that's a very conscious decision. I think that's intentional because 7 felt, because I always, obviously I'm not too, I've played Resident Evil 7, I've played the remake of 2 and a bit of 4 and a very small bit of the remake of 1. But I'm not really too like, I don't really know too much about this kind of overall world and things, but to me 7 was quite out there and didn't really, felt very different. And obviously it was very heavily focused on being scary and creepy. But that's not really the same with 8. It's not that 8 doesn't have anything like that. But the overall locations that you visit in 8, just, they're not as creepy kind of thing. It's kind of more, it's more varied. But obviously they tie into like the overall narrative of the game. So obviously, obviously where you go is kind of directed and pushed along by the story. So I would say the story here is like a much bigger, it's more of a clearer focus than 7's story, and that's not really like a negative towards 7, because 7 I think was trying to be, like a bit more kind of vague. It's not meant to be super clear about where it's going. It's kind of very, I think it all adds to the horror aspect of that game. But 8 is obviously much more about the story, and that is what's driving everything. So there's like a ton more cutscenes in this game. Like there's actually like tons of cutscenes throughout the game, and the story of this is much more, I'd say, meaningful in a way. Like I think it means more, and obviously it's more connected to the overall Resident Evil universe a little bit. But some of that comes kind of in more in more notes that you find that kind of the overall sort of world that it connects to in Resident Evil is more in notes than the kind of main story. The main story is very much about 7 and continuing 7's story, and kind of, I would assume it will kind of, that's where they're heading. They're trying to bridge the 7 and 8 story into the world of Resident Evil. But yeah, overall I really enjoyed the story. I thought the story was pretty great. I thought pacing wise this game was really, really good, honestly, compared to 7. The ship section of 7 stands out as one that just really drags on for me. I think my biggest negative with the story is that I wish more characters had more time in like the light kind of thing. I wish that they were more present, because some of them you kind of think that, oh, they must be a key character, and then you just don't see them for most of the game. And in some cases I think it works, and in other cases I think I think that there's a bit of a missed opportunity there to give more to those characters, and to make them more central, or at least through more of the game, to give them more screen time. But moving on, I want to talk about the kind of world and exploration of Resident Evil. Obviously, the Resident Evil has been, from what I've played and from what I know, the levels of Resident Evil are generally like I imagine that the amount of ground you cover is fairly sort of it's quite quite low, but there's a lot in the environments, and I think Village is not really any different from that, but Village has a lot more to see and a lot more new places, and so that means that there's less backtracking than before, and it felt like you're seeing more new environments, and you're not just going around the same locations. You can if you want, and there's still certainly reasons to do that, and obviously that ties into the gameplay element and everything like that. But it doesn't feel like the backtracking here. It sometimes felt like in 7 and 2, some of the backtracking would maybe hinder the pacing a bit, because it almost was like, oh, we're going back through the areas that we've already been to. I think that can sometimes be okay, but I think there's a very fine balance you've got to do with that, and I think for the most part 7 was okay, but I think 2, well no 2 wasn't too bad either. But I think sometimes depending on it, you want to move on in the game, you spend a while in one place. But 8 kind of gets away from that a little bit. So yeah, there's more to see, and it's a bit clearer to like. I wouldn't say where you're supposed to go. It doesn't like the game doesn't explicitly state here's where this is where you need to go, but it feels a little bit more. There's a few quality of life things like when you've. I think this one is one that's been in the previous games, but or in a few of the previous games. I think it was actually in Resident Evil 2 actually. Um, but when you explore an area for the first time, it will obviously show up as red on the map to show that you've not found everything in the area. But if you have found everything in that room or whatever, the game will flag it. It will show it on the map as blue, so you know you've found everything possible in that room, and so that you can kind of move on without worrying that you've missed something. And they have that, and I don't know. I can't remember if I think Resident Evil 2 had this. I'm not too sure about 7, but when you discover a door that has a locked key, obviously a lot of the time you'd be like, "Oh, that's that key," but you wouldn't necessarily remember them all. Uh, and so it actually shows the exact key on the map that you need. So if you've been near a door, you can kind of go, "Oh, that's where I need to go," and so that then helps when you are doing some backtracking and you've got to go through some other areas. And you're like, "Oh, where do I need to go next?" You kind of look on your map and you're like, "Oh, I remember that door. Well, I have that key now. I can go back." And there's a lot of that here. Some of that is for side content. Some of that's not really for main story stuff. But that's kind of the sort of that's what's nice about exploring and kind of learning the environment is that you kind of sometimes you find where you're meant to go, and other times you end up in a place where you're like, "Oh, I wasn't planning to find this," but I think, yeah, at times I maybe wonder if the game is a bit too straightforward. Like, if it was a bit. I don't want to call it easy, but it sometimes felt that maybe it just didn't have the same level of, like, puzzle solving as the other games. And I do think I found this game more engaging and interesting, like, well paced just throughout. Like, that was a good element, but I don't know if it's as. I didn't find. I feel like with Resident Evil 2, I was scratching my head more as to where to go, and sort of the same with 7. Whereas 8, I think because of those quality of life changes, probably primarily because of that, but also I don't think there's as much to do with like, oh, looking around this area, finding this thing to open this door. It doesn't feel like there is as much of that. Uh, but to be fair, every key area does have something like that, and I think maybe it's more like the illusion that everything's more well paced, so it feels like there's more to do and more to see, that kind of breaks all of that up. So it feels like there's less, but actually there's just the same amount. As I said, it was it still felt very much like Resident Evil 8. This does feel like a good place to go from Resident Evil 7, and I think anyone who was expecting like full on horror again, I think that was the wrong expectation to have. But speaking of the horror, not to say that this game isn't scary, because there are plenty of like scary moments in this game. Uh, it isn't as constantly scary as 7. There is a lot more action, a lot more combat, and a lot more inventory management, and a lot more in between those sections. But there are still certainly points of this game that are clearly very horror focused. I prefer action games overall, and I really enjoy the progression and the kind of unlocking stuff and upgrading things. So this game has a lot of that, and to me, there was a lot more balance between all of these elements. And I think what that creates is that creates to me a more interesting game overall, because I'm not huge, like I don't play tons of horror games, but I play a lot of action games, and I don't play tons of survival games, but I do like a lot of these elements, and I think the horror elements complement everything else here. I think anyway, all the elements of this game complement each other. Um, I especially, to me, whenever I played a horror game, it's typically survival horror. Like, I like Dead Space, The Last of Us, if you can count it. Obviously, some of the Resident Evil games. I like them because there's more to the game than just walking and being scared. Uh, and so, this game captures the gameplay side, to me, pretty much perfectly. Um, and, yeah, in terms of the horror, it still has moments, but it's obviously not as consistent, or as, and I don't want to call it like consistent, not as in it's bad, it's just there's not as much horror throughout kind of thing. Like Resi 7 for the most part was just a horror game through and through, and I think its gameplay was there again to complement that. And as the game is less scary here, the game isn't hindering you by slow movement and things like that. And so to kind of talk about the movement and the gameplay side, this game is like way more smoother than Resi 7. It feels way better to play, and it's perfect for the game, to be honest. It's like, you obviously, because of the fact that there's more of a combat focus, there needs to be more control. You need to feel like you have more power, and they execute that pretty much perfectly. You still have this balance of like, oh, I've got this many bullets, like how, I've got all these, I've only got these resources, or, can I get through this thing? That there's still elements of that on standard. I don't think it is anywhere near as bad, or I don't say bad, anywhere near as, it's not anywhere as near as like survival in that element as 7 was. 7 was a lot more of, holy crap, I barely got any ammo. I recently replayed 7, and there was a few moments sort of like that, and I don't think 8 really has that to the same degree, but I think there are elements of it, and it again, it makes sense, kind of thing. Like, it's as you're playing, it's the kind of thought process and what you're thinking about, and constantly you're looking at your menu being like, oh, have I got enough ammo? Where am I going to spend my money? Because, sort of spoil, I wouldn't call it spoilers, but there's a shop in the game, you can buy stuff, and not in-game item shop, by the way, like proper in-game currency in-world, and you can use that to upgrade your weapons and various things, and so all of that kind of complement each other. But as I said, you certainly feel, at least I felt, more powerful while I'm playing this game, and it resulted in me using the knife way more. There's actually points where I was using the knife because I was like, oh, I might as well save some ammo here, and use my knife instead. And sometimes you'd knock enemies on the ground, and I would do that. And there's a couple of attacks you can do with the knife, and it really does feel like there's a good amount of options that you have, I think, overall, and there's enough in the game that allows you to experiment a little bit. And obviously the knife isn't going to always be the best weapon to use, but I think it's cool that I felt that I could use that to save a bit of ammo. And of course, the knife isn't like super powerful. It's not that the knife is like, you're not one-shotting all enemies kind of thing, but it made it, because the knife in Resi 7 to me just felt pointless. And I think, again, a lot of combat in 7, I think, is intentionally designed to make you feel weak. Not, up until the end of the game of 7, where they sort of get, you get a little bit more stuff, and you've got all your weapons at that point, so you're kind of like, you kind of utilize everything in your backpack kind of thing, whereas here, it's more of that throughout the game, but it's still well balanced. That I don't think it makes it like too easy when it comes to combat. And of course, some of that expands when the world opens up more, so you can go and get extra weapons and upgrades. But yeah, I think overall gameplay combat loop, it's incredibly satisfying, and I really, really enjoyed it. And so this next section I'm going to get into is about the post-game unlocks. Now, if you don't want to know anything about that, not that it's super spoilery, there's nothing like that, but for anyone who doesn't want to know about some of the things you unlock when you beat the game, you can skip now to the verdict, which you can check the description for timestamps, and you can just sort of scroll along or click along to there if you want to skip this bit. But if not, I'm going to talk about, what you can unlock. And when you beat the game kind of comes up with this like litany of things, of like all these things you can unlock, and collect and hunt down, and things you do unlock for beating the game. And this ranges from like artwork, you've got character and weapon models, you get a new game mode, which they revealed before launch, the Mercenaries game mode. I think that's in previous games, obviously it's returning. There's a 4th difficulty unlock, there's a new game plus mode, there's other weapons you can unlock, and there's cheats, like infinite, I call them cheats, but they're like infinite ammo unlocks. And it's just like, and I shouldn't even mention, there's challenges as well. There's challenges you can complete that require like, oh, do this many things in the game, or beat the game 3 times, or beat the game on this difficulty, or beat it under 3 hours. Like, and there's even challenges for Mercenaries as well, for the other mode. And so there's just like this a whole list of things you can go off and do to get points to then be able to spend them. And what do I like? All of those are great. I haven't played Mercenaries just yet, so I might cover that separately. But my favorite thing, which I have played, is the New Game Plus mode. And obviously, for anyone who doesn't know, New Game Plus, you start with everything you collected on your first playthrough. And to me, this is just great. Like, it's perfect. It makes sense for the game as well. I'm really happy. I wanted it in Resident Evil 7, but obviously I didn't have it. and so I'm really happy that that's here. And what it does is it opens up more customization for replays. You can kind of be like, okay, well, I can go back and explore more. I can hunt down things. I can take my time more. I can speedrun the game. I can pick a specific weapon. If you fully upgrade a weapon, that allows you to unlock the infinite ammo unlock. So you could, an example I give him a review is like, oh, you could speedrun the game with pistol only infinite ammo or whatever. And like, sure, infinite ammo makes that uninteresting, but it just allows you to kind of have a little bit more freedom of how you actually play the game. And how, if you want to replay it, you can obviously do knife only. You can unlock a more powerful knife. Like, it's things like that that I'm just like, this is perfect. This is exactly. And what's really good about this as well is that the New Game Plus mode then offers a really nice balance for a standard new game, because if anyone's like me, I played like old Ratchet games, Ratchet and Clank, and I'd play New Game Plus on what they call challenge mode, and it would be really cool, like upgrading my weapons further past level, because you can on Ratchet you get like you go up to level 5, and then when you replay you can get from 5 to 10. So yeah, when you replay that, you have like the really cool elements of like, oh, you know, I'm upgrading stuff even more, they're getting even more powerful, the game's more difficult. You get all these elements. I don't actually know if the game gets more difficult on New Game Plus, by the way, I should say. I don't think it does, but you have the difficulty options, so that kind of offsets some of that if you wanted to. Um, but anyway, so, you know, you'd upgrade up, and then sometimes you'd want to start the game afresh, like with nothing, and start from like square one again. And I think that New Game Plus offers this really nice balance between starting off with nothing and starting off with everything. And obviously the difficulties allow you to sort of change how hard you want it on either mode. And I just think it's such a good reward for beating the game, because it's just, as I said, this that balance, the kind of and you put your mastery to good, like, to use as well. Like Resident Evil's like perfect. As you play the game, you learn the levels, you learn the layout and how to do things, and that mastery is almost like key in making in allowing you to play better, kind of thing. And obviously that's perfect for New Game Plus, and for even New Game, you know, just standard New Game. Um, and I think what also helps is that the game has a pretty short runtime. Like, I think all Resident Evil games, from my understanding, are games that you can beat in a relatively short time. At least I know 7 and 2, at least 2 remake, certainly were. And the kind of difference I would say here is that, like, sure, you could say this about any game, but Resident Evil is very gameplay based. So it might take you like 8 to 10 hours on your first run. I mean, it took me I think it's 8 hours and 12 minutes was what it took me. But because of how much of it is gameplay based, there isn't like waiting around for NPCs or scripted events. It is like, it is a question of how fast can you as a player do this section. And what makes that even better on replays is that there's skippable cutscenes. You can skip them the first time you play through them, and that allows you to just bypass all of that. And that means your actual runtime, your playtime, is dependent on your gameplay. And because of how many things are skippable, that then allows you to literally just blitz through the game, and you can beat it. I've seen people like, oh, you know, in 3 hours. I'm sure there's people that do it in 1 or 2 hours, and it's like, that's just so good. It's so good that, like, that this is how much flexibility this game has. This game is like top to bottom mastery, like customization, like the sheer amount of like unlocks, and it's all of this to me is a bonus. Like, it's on top. This is on top of the fact that the game itself is really great for a one-time experience even. And so yeah, to kind of move on to my verdict and my overall thoughts, I really did like this game, and I think that there's certainly things that can be discussed about. I think, you know, Ethan as a character can be hit or miss. I think some of the bosses in the game maybe aren't super inspired. I think they are probably difficult to do in a first-person shooter anyway, or at least a FPS perspective. I say FPS, FP, you know, first-person perspective. I think they're difficult to do in. I still really enjoyed the boss fights. I thought they were cool, but they probably could be. You know, that's what I was talking to a couple of other people about on a podcast, which might be out by the time this goes out. I don't know. If it is, again, I'll link it in the description. But on Critically Incorrect, we spoke about the bosses. Yeah, but I don't think there's anything in this game that really kind of like holds it back at all. Like, it doesn't make me go, oh yeah, well, that bit was kind of weird. There is one part of the game which I have like probably mixed feelings on, and I will be interested in how I feel when I go back to it. Obviously, I'll be taking more time with it on New Game Plus because I want to explore and try and collect everything. Um, but it didn't drag the game down pacing wise like the ship section in Resident Evil 7, and that was like a big question mark. Like, is there going to be something in this game that's going to slow things down? And I think it did slow the game down a bit, and it maybe did go on a little bit too long. But it's not. I don't look back on it and think about it in that way initially. I just think it feels maybe a little bit out of place. And but yeah, I won't go too much. We're not going to go into spoilers about this because I want this to be spoiler free. But yeah, there's certainly one part of the game that I'm unsure about. But literally outside of that, outside of the bosses, and maybe a couple of plot holes as well, and Ethan's hit or miss, I just feel like Capcom have struck gold again. And it reminds me of DMC5, the way that DMC5 like comes back after so many years, and has this like really good story with like a more like it's telling a more human and honest story with these characters, but yet the game just doesn't stop being what the game is. What it doesn't stop being Devil May Cry, and that's exactly what Resident Evil Village is like to me. Is that it it is Resident Evil. It has all those elements that, from my understanding and from what I've played of the other games, all of them, all those elements are back and they're here. But it also has this more sort of serious kind of story on top of like bonus game content and like new game plus and just so much great stuff in this game. And I just honestly really enjoyed it, and I've basically not stopped thinking about the game since I beat it. I think it's really stuck with me way more than I expected it to, and it's been really awesome hearing what other people think. It's been cool watching people play through it. It's just a really good game, and I really like it. And I think I think generally those kind of any kind of critiques or issues I have with it, you can pretty much ignore and put to the side because I just don't think they are. I don't think they are. I don't think they hold the game back from being the really good. And I think overall, this game, if we're gonna score it, the game's like, to me, it's like a solid 9. I think a 10 I think a 10 was in sight. I just think with those certain hiccups or whatever else that the game kind of stumbles a little bit. But yeah, I'm gonna stop talking now, and we'll end it here. But yeah, if you've played Resident Evil Village, what do you think? Let me know your thoughts on that. If you're interested in picking up, if you were unsure, I'd be interested. If you have any questions, like, go ahead. Maybe this review's helped you. Who knows? But yeah, as I said, if you want to read a more in-depth version of this, I kind of go through more specific things in my review. If the podcast is out for Critically Incorrect, which it probably will be by the time this goes live, I'll leave that in the description if you want to check out not only the podcast in itself, but if you want to check out mine and Justin and Charlie's thoughts, you can go there. But yeah, outside of that, thanks for watching or listening, and I'll see you next time. So, ciao ciao.